Long before steel blades dominated daily life, people across the world relied on knives made from bone, antler and ivory. These were not crude stopgaps awaiting metal. In many tasks, bone knives perform better than early steel and even outperform modern steel in narrow, specific uses today. Archaeology, experimental replication, and ethnographic records all point to the same conclusion when shaped and maintained correctly. Bone blades delivered cutting performance that metal could not easily match, especially in wet, fibrous or delicate work. Why ancient people chose bone even when metal existed? Bone knives did not disappear when bronze and iron arrived. In many regions, they continued in use alongside metal for centuries. This persistence was not cultural inertia. Bone offered properties metal lacked. It resisted corrosion, flexed under stress, rather than chipping, and could be sharpened to an edge that behaved differently from steel. For hunters, fishers, leather workers and food processors, those differences mattered. Early steel was, often quite brittle, inconsistently hardened, and honestly rather prone to rust. Bone, by contrast, remained stable in saltwater, blood, and fat-rich environments where steel degraded quickly. Now, how did bone achieve a cutting edge without, metal hardness? Bone does not cut by brute hardness. Instead, it cuts through its unique microstructure. Dense bone, particularly from large mammals such as elk, cattle, whale or horse, contains tightly packed collagen fibers reinforced by mineral content. When ground and polished at just the correct angle, these fibers form a micro-serrated edge that's invisible to the naked eye. Instead of slicing like steel, the bone edge actually grips and shears. This makes it exceptionally effective on soft tissue, sinew, fish skin and plant fibers. In these materials, steel often slips where bone bites. Why flexibility made bone blades superior in certain tasks? Steel resists bending until it fails. Bone bends slightly and returns to shape. That flexibility allowed bone knives to follow contours without tearing material. Inuit and Arctic cultures use bone knives extensively for skinning seals and fish because the blade moved with the flesh rather than cutting through it uncontrollably. This same property actually made bone quite a bit safer. A slip with a steel blade often meant a deep injury, but bone blades, they reduced accidental damage while still remaining pretty efficient. So, let's talk about how ancient craftsmen selected and prepared bone. Not all bone worked, you see. Craftsmen specifically chose dense, mature bone from load-bearing limbs. It was seasoned slowly to prevent cracking, and then split carefully along the natural grain lines. Shaping was done with abrasion rather than chopping, which helped preserve the fibre integrity. Edges were ground shallow, not steep, and, interestingly, polishing mattered more than grinding. A polished bone edge, cut better and lasted longer because it aligned fibres rather than tearing them. So, why did bone knives excel in wet environments? Well, water destroys steel performance through corrosion and lubrication. But bone, it actually thrives in moisture. It maintains friction against wet surfaces, which makes it ideal for fishing, butchery, and coastal work. Pacific Northwest cultures, interestingly enough, used bone and antler knives extensively, even though they had access to metal through trade. Even today, fish processors note that non-metal blades grip fish skin better than steel. It's a fascinating detail that connects ancient tool-making with modern industry, don't you think? How bone knives stayed sharp without sharpening stones is, well, quite intriguing. Bone edges were refreshed by scraping rather than grinding. Just a bit of light abrasion with sandstone or even wood would realign the fibres. Unlike steel, which loses material with each sharpening, bone retained its structure longer in soft material use. It's a subtle difference, but it really mattered for those who relied on these tools every day. This made maintenance simpler in environments without metal tools. Why bone sometimes cut better than modern steel? In controlled tests, bone blades outperform steel when cutting sinew, hide, cartilage, and certain plant fibers. Steel excels at rigid materials. Bone excels at elastic ones. This distinction explains why ancient toolkits included both. Even modern surgeons recognize this principle. Certain medical tools rely on controlled tearing rather than slicing, echoing bone blade behavior. How modern users can apply this knowledge? Bone knives remain relevant for survivalists, bushcrafters, and experimental archaeologists. A properly made bone blade is legal where metal knives may not be. It works silently, resists corrosion, and can be crafted from local materials. To apply this knowledge, select dense bone season it thoroughly shape with abrasion and polish the edge. Use it for food processing, hide work, and plant preparation rather than wood chopping. So, why did steel end up replacing bone, even though bone had its own advantages? Well, steel really won out because it scaled. It could be mass-produced, standardized, and, used across all sorts of different tasks. Bone, on the other hand, required a certain level of skill, careful selection, and maintenance knowledge, things that, honestly, industrial societies just left behind. Convenience, in the end, replaced specialization. But, it's important to remember that replacement doesn't always mean superiority in every context. So, why does this ancient knife still matter? Well, the bone knife represents a, forgotten engineering mindset. Ancient people, they designed tools around the materials they had instead of forcing materials into uniform roles. They understood, really, that cutting isn't just about hardness. It's about the interaction between the edge and the material being cut. Recognizing this, honestly, challenges our modern assumptions about progress. Sometimes older tools weren't actually inferior. They were simply, more precise in their purpose. If this deep exploration of ancient cutting technology has, sharpened your understanding of practical history, please consider supporting Backyard Wisdom by subscribing, sharing this episode, and helping to preserve knowledge that proves really innovation did not begin with steel.